Jeremy's War, Chapter 10. The next 2 weeks seemed like a constant rush toward doing nothing. Brock returned to Fort George and then came back again to Fort York. He spent endless hours with officers and merchants and politicians meeting and organizing. But despite all the talk, no one seemed to know what was going to happen. 2 Yankee armies were on our doorstep. We probably didn't have enough men to beat even one of them. We certainly didn't have enough men to fight both. Everyone said Fort Malden was finished. Most predicted Fort George would be next. Everyone was waiting for the Yankees to take Amherstburg, for the invasion at Niagara to begin, for the final battle. Not many people doubted how the battle would end. But I became convinced everyone was wrong. Brock was building to something. I didn't know what, but each day he seemed more determined to... To what? He had an idea. I couldn't tell you what it was, but it had formed in his mind. He would pause halfway to where he was going and just stare ahead, frozen, motionless, maybe for a minute. Then he would shake his head, mutter something, and go on. I didn't know what his plan was, but it was coming together in moments like that. He couldn't see it himself, perhaps, not fully, but once it was formed, he would act. How could I know this? I was just a servant, after all, in charge of running errands and pressing clothes and making roast beef sandwiches. I was the last person in the world to make predictions about this war. But I was getting to know Brock, maybe better than some others knew him. He was a distant man, reserved with his officers and men, positively cold to civilians. I don't think he had a single friend. I don't think he'd ever had one. But I saw him at night when everyone else was in bed and he was alone in his study. Once I arrived with food he didn't know he wanted. I found him walking around a map, around, studying it from every angle. Suddenly he plunged at it, stabbed a finger at the middle, and practically shouted, "There!" At that moment I felt certain a battle was about to be won. I caught glimpses of him, the way he would arrange his face the second before he stepped into a room to greet people, the way he would stop in mid-stride to watch a robin wrestle a worm out of the ground, as if the robin, or maybe the worm, held the secret to the war, the way he would ask Maggie if her daughter was over the croup and listen gravely while Maggie explained how you dealt with a sick child. One morning, while I was in the kitchen pressing his uniform, he suddenly wandered in and sat down at the table. I asked him if he needed anything, but he just waved at me. No, carry on. So I went on pressing his coat while he looked out the window at the clothes flapping on the line in the morning breeze. "Jeremy," he suddenly said, "how did you get here?" "Sir? How did you get into the army? Do your parents know you're here?" "My parents are dead, sir." "I'm sorry." There was no false grief in it, just a sort of acknowledgement. "I left the farm after my mother died and walked here." "Did you want to become a soldier?" "No, sir. I just wanted to see things. When Captain Stanton came along, I decided to join up." He leaned back in the kitchen chair and studied me. "Why didn't you stay on the farm?" he asked. I thought for a moment and then answered with the truth. "I'm not a farmer, sir." He considered this for a moment. "No," he said finally. "I don't think you would make a good farmer. I must say, though, you have become a rather good batman." My face flushed. "Thank you, sir." "Watch how you press that collar." "Yes, sir." And he left. If I'd known a hymn, I'd have sung it. August 5th dawned gray and rainy. I was up with the sun, but when I went to Brock's room, he was already dressed and at work. I brought him some breakfast and a pot of coffee and got out of his way. He seemed different this morning, even more intense. Shortly after 9, he came bounding out of his room, shouting my name. I ran out from the kitchen and met him at the front door. "Sir?" He handed me a note. "Fields, go to the garrison and give this message to Major Watson. Then come back here and make sure my kit is ready to be loaded onto a wagon. See to it you're packed as well." Before I could even reply, he was out the door and on his horse. I sprinted from Government House to the garrison. Major Watson was still finishing his breakfast when I reached the officers' mess, panting. He read the note with his mouth full of bacon and eggs. Suddenly, he stopped chewing and swallowed hard. "Cheevers!" A young officer ran up. "Sir?" "Take 3 men, find the commanders of the militia, and have them report here immediately, and muster the men, have them ready to march on an hour's notice." Yes, sir. Weeks we had spent waiting, drilling, doing nothing. Now, in an instant, everything was action. Soldiers ran from one place to another. Even officers half jogged. Horses and mules were hitched to wagons. Men with lists called out numbers, while other men counted sacks of things and shouted numbers back. It looked like complete confusion to anyone who wasn't a soldier. I didn't have much time to watch. I went back to Government House and unpacked and repacked the trunk one more time. Then I went to Brock's bedroom. He had already packed a smaller trunk beside his bed with maps and papers and a set of pistols. I dragged it downstairs and loaded it and the big trunk onto a wagon that had been brought around. Brock had left more instructions. He wanted a small table, chair, and cot loaded into the wagon as well. We would find them in the attic. Brock was at the legislature. He sent a note ordering all militia and garrison officers to a council at Government House at 2 in the afternoon. Most arrived early. They paced about, looked at each other, sent off notes to their troops, and paced some more. Brock was late getting back. He strode through the front door and into the library, motioning the other officers to follow. No one even thought to close the door. I took up my station outside, ready and listening. Brock wasted no time. I have prorogued the legislature. He paused a moment to let it sink in. I wasn't sure what it meant, but it sounded serious. Since the civilian government is now temporarily suspended, Brock continued, there is no need for me to attend to its needs. I have decided to move into the fields. We are going to engage the enemy. Someone muttered, "Hear, hear!" The rest were silent. There had been rumors that not all the officers were as eager to fight as Brock was. Do you plan to relieve Amherstburg, sir, or concentrate on the Niagara front? One of them asked. Both. But, sir, here is what I intend to do. Gentlemen, if you will look at this map. Brock had made up his mind. I plan to leave this evening for Port Dover. I have already sent word for the Norfolk militia to be ready for us when we arrive. An older man with an accent like my own spoke gravely. If the Norfolk militia is to march with you, sir, the York militia will not be denied. The news clearly pleased Brock. It gladdens my heart to hear it, sir. Very well, then. My plans are to leave this evening by boat for Burlington Bay. I will take 100 of the York militia with me. From Burlington Bay we will march to Dover, then sail to Amherstburg. But, sir, one of them interrupted, if the Americans attack at Niagara, you will be hundreds of miles away. I do not believe the Americans are ready to attack. They are as cautious there as in Detroit. Everything must be perfect. The gods themselves must be visibly smiling before they will move. We still have time. As soon as we arrive at Amherstburg, I plan to combine our troops with the troops and Indians now there and attack the American army. Once it is defeated, we will rush the troops back to Niagara to be ready for the American attack there. Well, gentlemen, any questions? For a while there was only silence. No one seemed to know what to say. Finally, someone spoke up. I thought I noticed a slight tremble in his voice. Sir, the Americans have more than 2,000 troops in Detroit now. Even if the militia turns out and the Indians agree to fight, you'll have barely half that. Surely we can only hope for victory by taking a defensive stance. We have no time for defense. We must attack before the Americans realize what we've done. There was silence again. Even without being able to see them, I could feel the doubt in the room. They didn't believe in their general's plan. Brock knew it too. I understand your concern, he said. We are taking a considerable risk. Well, we must take risks if we're to have even a hope of success, and I believe this plan will succeed. Gentlemen, I have studied my enemy. I know the generals who command the Yankee armies. I've never met them, but I've gone over every battle they have fought, and they are both weak. Their General Hull in Detroit has had a week to attack Amherstburg, and he's not. Why? Because he is a timid man and will not attack unless he can be certain, absolutely certain, of success. I would have thought success at Amherstburg would be as certain as one could hope for, but it seems it is not certain enough for General Hull. The commander in the east, General Dearborn, is no better. Did you know he is so fat that he has to be lifted onto his horse? Fat generals are bad generals, gentlemen. They do not seize the moment. They are too busy getting onto their horses. And it seems certain now that we can count on the support of the Indian nations. The Shawnee leader Tecumseh has formed a large confederation, including the Wyandot, the Delaware, the Kickapoo, the Potawatomi, the Lake Indians, and others. The Americans are terrified that if they lose a battle, the Indians will show no mercy. So, I believe the Americans will not attack Niagara just as they have not attacked Amherstburg. They fear the consequences of battle, and armies that are full of fear can never gain victory. And that was that. There were more orders, more consultations, but the decision had been made. Brock had made it. There was nothing to do now but obey. The officers left Government House shaking their heads and muttering, but once out the door they practically broke into a run. There was much to do. They only had hours to get ready. These men may not have believed in Brock's plan, but they agreed to follow him, and there was nothing for it but to prepare. I was kept busy running messages, and in between stuffing as much food into a satchel as I could. I had no idea what we'd be eating during the trip, and I wanted the General to enjoy Maggie's cooking for as long as possible. It was early evening when Brock rode up on Alfred. I was in the wagon securing the trunks. He took a quick look at the luggage and nodded his head in satisfaction. "Look after my trunks, Fields. I will win the war, if you will not lose my kit." "I won't, sir." He galloped off toward the garrison, and we slowly followed. Already the volunteer troops were streaming into the garrison and organizing themselves at the docks. A schooner rested at anchor, ready to sail. The men and supplies rowed out on boats. It seemed to take forever. Getting Alfred to stand quietly on a barge during the ride out to the schooner was especially exciting. But it wasn't even midnight when the last of us clambered on deck. The night was dark, the stars hidden by clouds. A fine mist wet the skin and soaked through the clothes. The sailors scrambled up the masts and unfurled the sails. I stood amidships and looked back to see Brock standing on the deck above me, staring hard into the night. The wind caught the sails, the ship shuddered forward. We were on our way to war.